In order to make the saddle, we're going to laminate 3 pieces together. We'll slot one of them so the strings can go through, and then the others we'll just glue them on. It'll be a nice solid piece, and it should hold the strings very well. So the first thing we do is, this is 6 inches, so we find the center. Or a square center line. And then, after we square the center, our string holes are going to be 11 millimeters apart. So I need to make, so I'll put this as the center line, I'll mark that as center, and then we'll go with 5.5 on this side. Again, draw my line. And I'm using a pencil that's 0.5 thickness. It's quite thin, as you can see. So I'm going to make life easier, use my calipers, and I will make a mark. And there are my 6 string lines, and I'm going to score it with a knife, several light passes. This will just give the saw a place to start. Now my saw is a very thin saw. As you can see, it's 0.2 millimeters, 0.25 millimeters in thickness at the kerf. Actually, the kerf is about 0.5. So we want to make each string about 1 millimeter wide. And the way I'll do that is I'm going to cut through about 3/4 of the way. About halfway there. And if you cut all the way through, either get another scrap or you can glue it on and then continue. But I recommend getting a new one. So the next thing I do is I'm going to just cover the kerf cut and cut a new one. And as you can see, we now have a slot about 1 millimeter wide. So I'll continue down and do the rest of them, and then we'll be ready to glue it up. There we go. So we have our 6 slots. They're all about 3/4 of an inch in. And then when we glue them up, as you can see, we're going to have a very nice place for the strings to go through. All the edges have been trimmed off. You can see up here we have it nice and smooth in here and at the top, so it's looking like a car. So the next step, I want to build the, we'll call it the bridge, and what we're going to do is glue on these 3 pieces, and I put a register mark so I know which side goes towards the body, so when we put it back on it's consistent, because it may not be 100% symmetrical here, so if we know after it's done. We don't glue these up before putting them on because it will make it too rigid and it won't contour to the body. And we're going to need a really strong contact because there'll be a lot of pressure from the strings. So the first thing, so I glued up my first piece here. And when we put glue on this part, I want to make sure that I don't get glue into the grooves. I just want to put a little bit of glue in between each kerf cut. We don't want squeeze out getting in because it'll just make it difficult to ream them out a little bit later. So if we just put a little bit of glue on the, I glued up my second piece that has very little glue on it in the center, just enough to make it damp so that it will stick but not squeeze out, because I don't want to have too much squeeze out. I have my registration mark. And I put a piece of tape, I don't know if you can see it, so I have my center line. And they're going to move around a little bit, so we'll reposition them. And we're going to be trimming these, so it's not vital that they're absolutely perfect, but we want to be as good as we can on it. So I'll put another clamp here, and again just ease it down. Good, they're aligned pretty well. They're on my line. And I'm squeezing it down so that it contours to the shape of the craw. And that looks really good. I don't see any squeeze out in my string holes, but everything else is clamped down nicely. We'll let that dry for at least an hour, then we'll come back, we'll trim it up, and then we'll glue it on. The glue is dry on the bridge, so I'll just, before I remove it, I'll just mark the outside edge here. As you can see, the bridge is contoured to the top of the Kirar. It's looking good. So our first step is just to square off the edge. We'll square off the front edge. Good, now that it's square, we want to mark it to length. Bring the center line across. And our total distance is going to be 3 inches. So I'll cut that to length. So we have it 3 inches by 1.5 inches, and we still have our radius that we'll trim off later. So the next step is I want to create a cove on this. And what I'll do is I'll measure up 2 layers, which is 1/4 inch, and bevel it first, and then we'll round it off. So if I take my compass, and I'll do the same on the sides, on the ends. Just squaring up the edges here just so it looks nicer. Okay, so I'm sure you can see it's beveled. So now I'm going to take my dowel. It's a 1/2 inch dowel, and I'll just continue with the sides. I'm not going to bother with the back because once we put that on the Kirar, we'll contour it. So you can see I rounded over put a nice cove design on there. And to make sure that the string holes are open, I take a wound guitar string and just poke it in each hole. As you can see, I left the line and plenty of excess, so when we glue it on, we'll be able to trim that off. I have my center lines on my Kirar, on my bridge. I have them marked on my Kirar. I put my tape dam on there, and I line it up. Everything lines up nicely. I have a little bit of overhang on the back, so I can trim that off afterwards. Time to glue it up. And I am going to clean up the squeeze out on the edges after I get it all clamped up. I have a craft stick that I just pointed off so that I take this little wet piece of paper towel and I can get in there nicely. Wipe off all the excess glue. That will make things easier when I go to sand. I won't have that excess glue on the edges. And I'm going to leave my dam in place, and we'll let that dry up and cure for 30 minutes or so. Probably a little longer because, again, this is a stress point. I'll let that stay on probably an hour.